Hey there, guys and gals. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to teach the clarinet. Now, I don't know about you, but when I got out of graduate school, it didn't take me long to realize that I had really no idea how to teach the clarinet. Oh, I could assign etudes and I could show a few fingering here and there. I could show a few little tricks, but that's hardly a pedagogy, and that's hardly a knowledgeable approach to actually teaching the clarinet in any kind of systematic way. That had been totally lacking in my own formation, and I passed that lack right on to my students for quite a while. It took me a long time to figure out what was needed to actually help these students make progress. In this coming episode here, we're going to talk about some of those things that you need to know that will make you an effective teacher and help your students produce real good, characteristic clarinet sounds. The first thing the clarinet student needs to know is what a clarinet should sound like. Now, some people want to put this off, but I think right at the beginning, young clarinet players should be exposed to really wonderful clarinet playing. And so I recommend that you give your students a list of things that the performances that they should listen to and report back on. Now, this was much more difficult years ago when I was teaching the clarinet because we didn't have the internet and didn't have all the access to the wonderful performances that are on YouTube. But we have those things now. So at the end of this presentation, I'm going to give you a list of things. Actually, I'm going to put it down below, a list of some recordings that your clarinet students will definitely benefit from listening to. They need to know what the clarinet should sound like. If you don't give them an idea of what it should sound like, then they're going to get it from their stand partner. And that's really, really a bad idea. So learn how to teach what the clarinet should sound like and give your students good examples so they can hear what the clarinet should sound like. And then help them learn how to describe the sound. You'll find that information in my Educator's Guide to the Clarinet. In the first chapter, I talk about what the clarinet should sound like. If you don't tell your student what it should sound like, they'll never figure it out. Years ago, when I was with LeBlanc Corporation, I went all around the country teaching master classes, and I would ask students, what's the characteristic clarinet sound? And they would look at me like a caveman would a pocket calculator. They had no idea what a characteristic sound was. They just played the clarinet, and the sound that came out, that was the sound that came out, and they accepted it uncritically. Teach them critical listening. Teach them intellectually and auricularly what the clarinet should sound like, and you'll see your students make some good progress and become autodidactic, which is the most important thing in terms of people making progress. Once a student becomes autodidactic and self-critical, then you don't have to nag them. They can nag themselves. The next thing you need to know is how tone production actually works. Now, we don't have the advantage that violinists and pianists have, so in the fact that we can't see inside here. We don't have X-ray eyes like Superman or Superwoman, whoever that is. Anyway, so we can't see what's going on in here. We can only hear the sound that's coming out. So we need to learn exactly what the relationship is between blowing and blowing correctly and tongue position and embouchure and how these things work together to produce the characteristic sound. So you have the student knowing what the clarinet should sound like because you're teaching them concept, and you need to teach them behind their nose what the tongue position and what the air and what the embouchure should be doing, working all together to produce that characteristic sound. Then the students have a complete approach to actually making progress on the clarinet. What should the tongue position do? And what's the relationship of the tongue position to the air? And then what about the embouchure? What's the most efficient way for the embouchure to work? And what will cause the embouchure to actually produce a resonant-free, flexible sound, and yet one that is highly controlled and highly what we would call focused or centered. All those things you need to know. And once you learn those things, then you'll be able to hear the student play, and you will essentially, your ears will become, for the student, what X-ray vision would become for Superman, because you will be able to hear in their sound, in the pitch, the color, and the shape, and the stability of the sound. You'll be able to hear exactly what the student is doing right or wrong behind their nose. And if you can't hear a student play and know exactly where their tongue position is, know exactly what they're doing with their embouchure, know exactly what the shape of the sound is like in relationship to the air and tongue position and all that, then you're not adequately prepared to really help the student. You have to learn to see with your ears what's going on behind the student's nose. And without that, you're going to be just going through guesswork. And that is no way to teach. Guesswork is no way to teach. So learning what's going on behind the nose, absolutely essential. Learning the mechanics inside the body, the air, the tongue position, and the embouchure, and the reed control with the embouchure, learning all those things and how they work and how they relate and what they produce is essential for you to becoming a really great clarinet teacher and actually solving your students' problems and eliminating all the guesswork. The next thing you need to know is how to evaluate the repair condition of the clarinet. If the clarinet is in poor condition, in poor adjustment, if pad heights are too high or too low, or if keys aren't coordinating properly, then the student's going to be struggling, the instrument's going to be fighting them, and everything you ask them to do is going to be more difficult. In fact, I actually got into the technical side of clarinet work because of my students struggling with clarinets that were in bad condition, and they couldn't get good repair work done, certainly couldn't get it done in time for me to teach them lessons properly. And more frustratingly, I would wait until, say, Christmas vacation, and students would go away, and then they would come back and they would have their clarinets worked on, and they were worked on by people who didn't know what they were doing. So the clarinet was actually in worse condition when it came back. So we'd waste a whole semester, or a lot of time anyway, with the clarinet in bad condition. And so finally I said, heck with it, I'm going to learn this. I've got to learn how to do this for my students' sake. And it's worked out well because it helped add more dimension to my own teaching, but it also propelled me into another career, which was clarinet design and clarinet acoustics. But that's another video. The next thing you need to do is to know how to balance reeds really well. If your students are playing on unbalanced reeds that are heavy on one side and light on the other side, it's going to be a real struggle to play the clarinet. And they're going to find that because reeds are so variable one to another, that one day they can sound fine because they have a good reed that works, and the next day they sound terrible. You have to be able to give them something consistent in terms of the reed mouthpiece setup so that the student can make consistent progress. Elsewise, they'll be constantly frustrated, but also they'll develop really bad habits, using their embouchure and using their air and everything in the wrong way because of a badly balanced reeds or just a whole series of bad reeds. You need to learn how to test reeds yourself. You need to learn how to balance reeds really well so that you can play consistently. The flute players and the trumpet players, when they interface with their instrument every day, it's pretty much the same. There's very little variation. But with reed players, we have always the reed to contend with. Unless we have mastery over the reed and can balance reeds really, really well, we'll find that our progress in playing is going to be really frustrating and going to be really slow. And this is doubly so with young players. So that's why it's very important to make sure that these players are playing good reeds all the time that are well balanced. And that's incumbent on you. The next thing you need to do is to be able to evaluate mouthpieces so that your students get a good mouthpiece to play. Now, I've heard a lot of band directors here in Texas say, "Oh, I really like the sound of that mouthpiece." And they said, "I want all my students to play that mouthpiece." And then the students begin to play the mouthpieces, and the clarinet section sounds like crap. And why? Because the students are playing flat. They can't play up to pitch because that particular mouthpiece that had such a nice sound was actually, part of the nice sound was the fact that it was a nice low pitch, a nice rich sound and all that. Well, you can't forget that you can't forget about pitch in evaluating a mouthpiece. Normally, we think about the response of the mouthpiece. We think about the color of the sound. Think about how it works with certain reed strengths. We evaluate the facing, and we think we're good to go. But you're not. Mouthpieces will play really very, very differently in terms of pitch levels. And if you get students that are playing a low-pitch mouthpiece, especially in bands, the students are going to be really struggling a lot. So never neglect in evaluating the pitch level of a mouthpiece when you're trying to choose something good for your students. So learn how to do those things, learn how to test those things, and your students will be a lot happier, and so will you. In closing, I want to repeat that assigning etudes and assigning pieces of music is not teaching the clarinet. Teaching the clarinet has to do with actually making the sound and making a characteristic sound and controlling the sound all throughout the dynamic range and all through the pitch range. That is learning how to play the clarinet. So students, when they're learning how to play the clarinet, they work on techniques separately from actually playing pieces of music, just like a fighter works on, all kinds of different techniques that he uses in the ring. He skips rope, and he practices with the punching bag. He does a whole bunch of things, a medicine ball, and so on and so forth, that he's going to use when he gets in the ring. Okay, but he has to work on those things separately. So your students have to work on those things separately, on voicing the clarinet with the proper tongue position, on blowing correctly, using the air correctly in the body, on playing the high register, voicing the high register, playing scales evenly without any movement here behind the nose, and so on and so forth, listening for a uniform pitch, color, and shape of all the notes of color and shape of all the pitches as you're playing up the scale and all that. All those things are developed separately. Playing dynamics, extremely important. So all those things have to be worked on separately, and that is teaching the clarinet. And guess what? It's boring, all right? And it's difficult. But it yields a great fruit when you actually go to play those pieces, because you have control over the clarinet. You have mastery over what's going on behind your nose. Your clarinet's in good shape. Your reeds are well balanced. You have confidence. You can go out and play. If you neglect these things, actually going out and playing will always be a very treacherous, kind of scary experience. So don't neglect actually teaching the clarinet while you're teaching the clarinet. If you'd like to gain more in-depth knowledge into each of the things that we talked about here, plus a lot more, let me recommend to you my book, The Educator's Guide to the Clarinet. This is a book that was written in 2001, and it's been praised by many of the world's finest clarinet players and clarinet pedagogues as the best book written on teaching and playing the clarinet. If I could recommend a better book to you, I would, but I can't. And as long as I'm making recommendations, let me suggest that if you haven't already, click that subscribe button down there below and click the little bell to make sure that in future videos you get them and you don't miss them, because I guess if you don't click that bell, somehow they're not going to send them. I'm not exactly sure. But do it anyway, because the overlords of the internet command it. And in the meantime, thanks so much for listening in onto our videos, and I hope you enjoy them. And if you have anything that you would like discussed, any subjects, please let me know. I'll be more than happy to investigate them, and if I can possibly present something that I think is worthwhile for you, I'll definitely do it. So I depend on you to let me know what you're interested in. In the meantime, good clarinetting.